This is Margin Machine, where we follow the money behind AI. Olive AI raised $857 million in a single funding round. Then, 14 months later, it was completely dead. By the end of this video you'll know exactly how a company with over $1 billion in total funding ran out of runway, and why blaming the technology is the wrong answer. The real killer was something much quieter. Welcome back to another autopsy. To understand the collapse, you need to understand what Olive was selling, and more importantly, who was buying. Hospitals are drowning in administrative work. Insurance claims, prior authorizations, billing codes. One mid-sized hospital system can spend $30 million a year just on revenue cycle staff. That is not a rounding error. That is a department. Olive came in around 2012, originally as a robotic process automation company, and said, "We'll automate that. We'll deploy AI workers inside your systems. Pay us a subscription, cut your headcount, keep the savings." The pitch was clean. Hospitals signed. By 2021, Olive reportedly had over 900 hospital customers across the United States. The company was valued at $4 billion. And the CEO, Sean Lane, was on every major stage talking about building the Internet of Healthcare. That framing matters. Because when you position yourself as infrastructure, investors price you like infrastructure. They assume you're permanent. They assume churn is someone else's problem. And that assumption is exactly where the rot started. But here's the part nobody mentions: the customers were already getting nervous. Between 2020 and 2022, Olive went on a buying spree. They acquired Empiric Health. They acquired Verata Health. They acquired a company called Danex. Then Codametrics. Then Spoke Health. Each acquisition was announced with a press release about synergies. Each one added complexity, headcount, and cost. If you saw our video on the company that raised $230 million before one slide killed everything, you already know where this is going. Acquisitions are how fast-growing startups hide the fact that organic growth is slowing. You buy revenue instead of earning it. The problem is you also buy the costs, the culture debt, and the integration risk. Olive was running 6 different product lines by 2022, none of them fully talking to each other. The AI that was supposed to be a unified platform was actually a patchwork of bolt-on software trying to look like a single product. And maintaining that illusion cost money. A lot of it. Reportedly north of $400 million a year in operating expenses at peak. The math only works if customers stay and expand. And that is when the churn numbers started surfacing internally. Would you have taken the deal Olive's early investors got? Tell me in the comments, because the answer changes completely depending on when you got in. Here is where everyone gets it wrong about Olive's death. Most of the coverage focused on the layoffs, 2 rounds of them, cutting around 450 people in 2022 alone. That's the visible wound. But the actual cause of death was a metric called net revenue retention. Net revenue retention tells you whether your existing customers are spending more or less than they did last year. A healthy SaaS company sits around 110 to 130%. That means customers are growing with you. Olive's, reportedly, was sliding below 100. Customers were not expanding. Some were leaving. And in a business built on a subscription model with high implementation costs, below 100 NRR is a death sentence written in slow motion. You can raise your way through bad NRR for a while. Olive did. But when interest rates started rising in 2022, the cost of that capital changed. Investors who had been pricing Olive like a high-growth infrastructure play suddenly started pricing it like what it actually was, a services business with shrinking customer commitment. The $4 billion valuation evaporated. And that's when it gets really strange, because the board's solution made everything worse. In late 2022, the board decided to restructure. They split Olive into 3 separate business units and tried to sell each one independently. On paper, this sounds rational. If the whole is unsellable, maybe the parts have buyers. But what it actually did was signal to every remaining customer that Olive as a product was over. If you were a hospital CIO who had spent 18 months integrating Olive's automation into your billing workflow, and you saw that the company was being carved up and sold for scrap, what would you do? You would start your own exit process. You would call competitors. You would begin the painful work of ripping out the platform. And that is exactly what happened. Churn accelerated at the worst possible moment. The asset sale became a fire sale. By late 2023, Olive had sold off its units piecemeal, Codametrics went one direction, the core revenue cycle business went to a company called Waystar. The workforce went from over 1,200 people to essentially zero. The company that had been valued at $4 billion was sold in parts for amounts that were never fully disclosed. We follow the money here every week, subscribe so you don't miss the next trail. This is the part of every autopsy that matters most. When a billion-dollar company dies, the money doesn't disappear. It moves. Waystar was the biggest beneficiary. They absorbed Olive's revenue cycle management customers and technology at a distressed price, and then went public in 2024. Their IPO valued them at around $4 billion. Let that land for a second. Waystar essentially captured a significant portion of Olive's market position, bought it cheap, and relisted at a valuation that looks almost exactly like what Olive was once worth. That is the quiet wealth transfer that never makes the obituaries. Other winners, Epic Systems and Oracle Health, both of which already had deep roots in hospital infrastructure, quietly picked up customers who needed somewhere stable to land. And a wave of smaller revenue cycle automation startups, companies like Thoughtful AI and Cohere Health, suddenly had a clear runway. Olive's collapse was their marketing campaign. Every hospital CIO who got burned was now available. And those smaller companies had one structural advantage Olive never built: they stayed narrow. One problem, one customer type, one workflow. No acquisition sprawl. No $400 million burn rate. Just a specific thing that actually worked. Olive raised over $900 million in total. It had 900 hospital customers at its peak. It had real technology that solved a real problem. And it still failed. The reason is structural, not technical. Olive built a cost base that required permanent hypergrowth to survive. The moment the market stopped rewarding growth at any cost, the moment investors asked for a path to profit rather than a path to scale, the architecture cracked. This is the pattern you'll see again and again in AI startups right now. Companies raising enormous rounds, buying competitors to pad revenue, signing enterprise contracts that look great in the deck but carry brutal implementation costs. The AI layer is real. The automation is real. But the financial engineering underneath is the same story that's failed 100 times. A business that only works if nothing ever slows down is not a business. It's a bet. Olive bet big and lost. And the hospitals that trusted them spent months rebuilding systems from scratch, at a cost that nobody in those original press releases ever mentioned. But here's what nobody's asking yet: what happens to the next generation of AI companies running the exact same playbook right now, at even larger scale? There are at least 3 AI companies currently valued above $2 billion that have lower net revenue retention than Olive did at the moment its board voted to sell. We know their names. We know their numbers. And we know which strategic buyers are already circling. If you want to know which AI unicorn is next on the table, and who's going to buy the pieces, click the video on your screen right now.